Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, October 25th, 2013. Thank goodness it's Friday. Thank goodness it's Friday. A lot of stuff going on today. Phone lines are open. 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. Sam is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, his hand hovering over that phone, ready to swoop on down and grab it when you call on in with your particular perspective on what's going on. There is a lot going on. Obamacare, website crashing, new revelations about the NSA monster quake just hit off the coast of Japan. And so what has the corporate media been focusing most of its attention to all this morning? The murder of John Benet Ramsey and the revelation that the grand jury wanted to indict the parents in the district. This is 15 years old. And the prime suspect in the murder has already died of natural causes. So they're wagging John Benet at you. So they don't have to cover more hearings about why the Obamacare website was such a disaster, or new revelations about Benghazi, or more revelations about the NSA and the IRS scandals. This is conditization, well and true. Now, speaking of the corporate media and the quake they just had off the coast of Honshu, the quake was actually off the east coast of Honshu, Japan. And Fox News, when they put up their map and said, oh, there's a big quake and tsunami warnings for the Japanese area, they actually had it wrong. They put the epicenter of the quake off the west of Japan. And I put up the photos for comparison between Fox and the USGS. So now we know why that recent poll showed that 2/3 of Americans do not trust the corporate media to give them accurate information, either through fraud, lies, and propaganda, or just simply because they're down to using the cheap talent and they make a lot of mistakes. So it's another classic botch-up permanently enshrined here in the independent media. More revelations about healthcare.gov, and apparently the revelation that it, too, is tied in with this vast NSA system to collect data about you. So anything that you put into healthcare.gov is now copied over to the NSA's giant data centers. And it's just another revelation. We have a government that is so paranoid and so afraid of the American people, and indeed the people of the world. They just have to watch you all. It's constant surveillance. Although I think it was Pelosi was saying, it's not surveillance, just because we're watching you all the time and listening to everything that you say on the phone and reading all your emails, that's not surveillance. Yes, here we are here. Now, they're still making a big fuss over this licensing violation regarding this one piece of code that the developers took for healthcare.gov. It was being given out for free. Here, you can have it, you can use it. All we ask is you give us credit that we wrote this part of the code. It's a very common practice in the open source community, and the healthcare.gov people took the script, stripped out the identifying information, and incorporated it into their product. And everybody said, this is a clear violation. And nobody's going to sue or anything like that. It's just, a very impolite thing to do. But the question that should be asked here, certainly by the corporate media, and is being asked by the independent media, why would they do that? Why would they go to the work of going through and taking out the identifying block and the little copyright notice unless they were trying to claim to the U.S. government that they wrote the code and it represented billable time? And I think that's the reason they did it, and I think at some point we're going to find out they were copying and borrowing a lot of code from a lot of people and claiming original authorship in order to bill the government. Because this project 3 years ago was originally bid at $88 million, which is already way too much for a system of this size. And now it's ballooned up something, I've heard estimates between $400 and $600 million is what this finally cost. And now they're having to throw millions more at it. We're going to grab a phone call here. Drew in Colorado. Aloha, Drew. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. Everybody talks about the northern hemisphere, the southern hemisphere, and on the melts. And the journal of Science about 5 years ago explained it exactly. It's particulate matter that's settling on the snow, and it's melting the snow 10 times faster than the atmosphere is. They also predicted there's a cold water dam being built up in Greenland, and it's going to break through. The cold water is going to hit the ocean, shut down the Gulf Stream.
Hang on. First of all, that heat conveyor theory has already been discredited. I know it was the basis of the movie The Day After Tomorrow. But the reality is that 10 years ago we were hearing all these dire predictions and dire warnings. I know the former head of Greenpeace was saying the same thing, that Greenland was going to lose all of its ice in the space of 20 years, and that was 10 years ago, and Greenland actually has more ice today. The fact of the matter is, the way science is supposed to work is you come up with a theory, then you compare it with the real world through experimentation. And if the real world does not match the theory, you scrap the theory. But in politics, you come up with a claim, human-caused global warming, and when the real world doesn't match it, you go back and say, oh, what we meant to say was this. 10 years ago, snow will be a thing of the past. Now they're saying global warming causes snow and cooling. So thank you very much here. But and what's going on here is really very, very simple. The Obamacare scam was going to generate an estimated $200 billion in added tax revenues to the federal government at a time when they are desperate to lure new lenders. Now that they've completely waived the debt ceiling, it's completely gone. Their credit card is now completely open, wide open, no limit, and your great-grandchildren are on the hook to make the payments on it. But they're not getting that boost in tax revenues from Obamacare because of the botched website and the fact that people are just saying, I can't afford the Obamacare compliant health insurance. And so now this is why they're fanning up. Even as we're going into another record-setting winter, they're trying to fan up human-caused global warming. It's a disaster. It's going to happen any second unless you give us your carbon tax money. And that's what's really going on here. Now, getting back to Obamacare. Interesting article over at undergrounddocumentaries.com. They have an article regarding the enormous markups on U.S. health care. Now, we have talked before about the amazing disparity in prices for medical care in the United States versus identical procedures and identical medications in other countries. And it's something like 10 to 1 on some of these procedures. Medical tourism is now big business here in the United States of America, where people need a medical procedure and they will fly to another country for a couple of weeks and get the procedure done there and pay for it and then come back to the United States of America, and they're money ahead, even with the cost of taking the trip. They get to go someplace cool and play tourist, and they get their medical care, and in many cases it's actually better quality than what you can get here in the United States of America. Now, as I was mentioning before in my little rant about the revival of the carbon tax agenda, a lot of people were talking about this deal that was made to raise the debt ceiling. They didn't raise it. They just suspended it. They just removed it. There is no debt ceiling. Between now and February 7th of 2014, the federal government can borrow and spend as much as it wants. And you know what a buying spree they could go on over the next 80 days. And, of course, they're expecting that you and your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren will just gladly work and sacrifice your lives away to pay back all this money, which is not borrowed for the benefit of the American people. You can look around your local community and see the government is not spending your money on you, your neighborhood, your town, your city, your state, your country. It's all going to Wall Street and the war machine. It's going to Israel. It's going to cronies, money to Pakistan. Now, a very telling article over at peakprosperity.com. The Fed can only fail, and it's basically elucidating on something I've been saying all along. The Federal Reserve System is a pyramid scheme. It survives only as long as it can grow, and there's a point at which that growth must stop. When everybody's hopelessly in debt, it crashes. That's what's happening now. We'll be back after these commercials. America, welcome back to the show here. Now, as you're probably aware, there's been a lot of news over this negotiated settlement between the U.S. government, which has been soundly criticized for failing to act either to prevent the 2008 meltdown or to actually bring criminal charges against any of the people behind that massive mortgage-backed security fraud. And this settlement is a civil settlement, which means nobody who was behind the fraud goes to jail. They don't even get a wrist slap. And, of course, to hear all these financial reporters in the corporate media, oh, this is horrible, it's anti-capitalist, it's politics, it's their punishing. This is the sweetest deal J.P. Morgan ever got. They took trillions of dollars from the American people, and they've got to give $13 billion back. And here's the kicker. They're going to take most of that settlement off of their taxes, which means that loss gets dumped back on the American people yet again. But the financial corporate media, they're screaming, this is unfair. And banks are now saying that for future bailouts, we demand protections, that we will not have to be punished for wrongdoing that we are caught doing here. And Jon Stewart on The Daily Show just absolutely ripped these people on CNBC and Fox a new one for trying to defend and prop up J.P. Morgan, because the bottom line is J.P. Morgan and all those other Wall Street banks committed a massive fraud against the entire world with those mortgage-backed securities. They are guilty. And they're basically walking away with a wrist slap. They get to keep the trillions and trillions of dollars they made. And I remember this one segment that was included on Jon Stewart's segment, which is linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, where this defender of J.P. Morgan is saying, look, they're a wonderful company. They're making trillions in profits. And the other guy says, how do we know it's not all fraud? And the guy, how could you possibly? Where are you hearing that? And they said, the New York Times. And the other journalist said, the New York Times, they're not credible. You want to read the Wall Street Journal. So, tip of the hat to Jon Stewart on that one. Sometimes I love him, sometimes I don't. But definitely he was on the mark with this one. Elizabeth Warren is still out there saying it is time to start putting these big Wall Street firms, CEOs, in jail. We've got to do what Iceland did. Because as long as you allow Wall Street to defraud the American people with impunity, which is basically what $13 billion sounds like a lot of money to you and me, but compared to the trillions they made off the fraud, it's nothing. It's spare change. We are incentivizing Wall Street crime against the people. Let me take that back. The U.S. government is incentivizing Wall Street crime against the people. Because Wall Street does pay some taxes. And so from the point of view of a government that is desperately broke, hopelessly in debt, anything that generates tax revenues is going to be good, even if it's a crime. Planned obsolescence, global warming, Obamacare, anything that just gets more money coming in to try and keep the bottom of that ledger in the black. And it is ultimately doomed to fail. We should have done what Iceland did. Start throwing these criminals in prison. Start out by acknowledging there is a problem. Money addiction is an illness. And just because somebody works on Wall Street and wears expensive clothes and a $100,000 wristwatch and drives $1 million car doesn't mean they are superior human beings. They are still criminals. They're successful criminals, but they're criminals. Now, a lot of people are very concerned over the fact that food stamp money is going to decrease starting the first of the month. And I know it's a major concern out here with these food programs that we're involved in. A lot of people are saying there could even be riots and anger. I'm not sure that's going to happen. And again, I certainly hope it does not, because riots and violence is what this government wants right now. Because they know how to deal with that. They got guns, they got hollow point ammunition, they got bullets, they've got armored vehicles. They know how to crush down the people when necessary. But again, what this government cannot handle, what they are not prepared to deal with, is 330 million American people standing up and shouting to the rest of the world, we are no longer the wallet of last resort for Wall Street's crimes and Washington, D.C.'s corruptions. And it's not even a case of whether we're willing or not to cover their losses. We're tapped out. We are broke. And that's what's going on there. We're going to grab another phone call here. Clint in Las Vegas. Aloha, Clint. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
I had a friend the other day, and he asked me, well, which banks are, corrupt, and which ones are, which ones are the federal ones, Federal Reserve ones? And I said, well, just go on Google and type in the bank your interest, like Bank of America, and just type in caught, and then usually it'll fill it in automatically what they've been caught doing.
Mm-hmm.
But like Wells Fargo caught laundering drug money, and you can go from there. And if it turns out they just paid a $100 million fine and nobody went to jail, that's the bank you want to stay away from. What I wanted to talk to you about was your the deal on Coast to Coast AM that I listened to.
Mm-hmm.
And George Norrie made the point: what if the government, all the principal players are dead, and what if the government just came out and just said it? And I just thought, well, if I was a prosecutor, the first two people I would send to a grand jury would be David Rockefeller and George Bush Sr.
Well,
so the principals are not dead.
I would agree with you on that. Plus, in at least one case, we're dealing with the actions of a foreign government, which is still very much around and causing a lot of problem. That would be Israel, because remember, John F. Kennedy was adamantly opposed to Israel acquiring nuclear weapons, and that was Israel's motive for being involved. He'd certainly angered the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve is still around. And, but I think the main reason the U.S. government is spending so much time and taxpayer money trying to maintain the official story of everything, JFK assassination, torpedoes on the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, is because as soon as the government starts admitting that some of these former things that we have all been told was the truth were a lie, then the American people start looking at what's going on today and looking for reasons to doubt the official story. That's already happening. And every new administration coming in inherits the burden of maintaining the accumulating official lies going back 100 years. And these days it is an immense burden indeed. And I'm in agreement with George Norrie that if this government wants to save itself, it has to demonstrate to the American people that they're going to stop behaving the way they have been behaving and take a radical change in course, which includes saying those conspiracy wackos were all right. We did lie about all those other things. And we're not going to lie anymore, and we're going to work for 50, 100 years to regain your trust, but we recognize we can't go on doing things the way we've been doing since the height of the Cold War, because on that path lies madness, ruin, and destruction. This government won't do it because of the very nature of politicians. These are people who will not accept responsibility for their wrongdoing. And that is why we're just going to have to sit back, eat our popcorn, and just watch as the whole shebang comes crashing down. Okay?
Can I bring up one other point?
Real quick, we're almost at a commercial break.
You made the point of John J. McCoy was not, qualified to investigate the murder of the president. Well, neither was Allen Dulles.
Well, Allen Dulles was the guy that Kennedy had fired from the CIA, so he was there to protect the CIA's involvement. We'll be back after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, we've mentioned this before, but we need to keep this in the minds of everybody, because the IMF is now proposing a 10% super tax on all Eurozone household savings. In other words, people who put their money in the bank for safety so that it would grow are actually going to have a chunk of that ripped off to prop up this pyramid scheme banking system. They got away with it in Cyprus, managed to steal all the money from the Cypriots without triggering a revolution. Hey, let's do it everywhere. And by the way, this is not new. We have seen throughout history governments and banking systems that are broke just saying, it's our divine right to reach out and just take money from you. All the way back to, ancient Rome used to do that all the time. Henry VIII did it. Remember we were talking about on the French Revolution, it wasn't actually one revolution, it was several in a row, because each new incoming revolutionary government started acting like the government they just replaced. And in 1789, the new government started confiscating wealth to balance its books. We know in 1933, during the Great Depression, Roosevelt confiscated gold. So they've done it before, and they're getting ready to do it again. So now's the time, and I'm not the only one saying this, over at dinarrecaps.com, it's time to take your money out of the bank. The whole system is exposed as a criminal enterprise to the world. It is a Ponzi scheme. When you have a privately owned bank granted money creation authority and then uses that authority to issue all of the public currency as a loan at interest, inevitably debt grows faster than the available money supply with which to pay that debt, until that accumulating debt swamps the GDP and the bankers just start grabbing everything, putting it in their pocket. That's the end result of this thing. Now, right now, in all of the nations that are enslaved to these private central bank scammers, the aggregate derivatives exposure risk is already over $1 quadrillion. I'm not even sure the entire planet is worth that. It all comes apart and somebody's going to stand up and say, on paper, I own planet Earth, you must do what I say. And there'll be some suckers who believe that, but I certainly don't. We've heard talk within the U.S. government of ordering retirees or those about to retire to liquidate their IRAs and 401ks and subscribe to a brand new government-managed retirement fund. Well, we already have a government-managed retirement fund. It's called Social Security. And look what they did to that. Starting in the Clinton administration, the government borrowed the cash buildup in Social Security that was supposed to fund the baby boomer retirements. They took that cash out and they put in treasury bonds. And now they can't redeem them. And that's why they're talking about, oh, we have to raise taxes, we have to cut benefits. There's a crisis in Social Security. Yeah, you made it. The government created the Social Security crisis because they forgot it wasn't their money. That money in Social Security was the property of the workers who paid into the fund with every single paycheck they ever earned, trusting the government would manage that money, generate a profit to help their retirement. Didn't happen. Government took the money and just spent it on things. Bill Clinton used it to create his magic federal budget surplus. And the Democrats are still waving that around. Look how well we managed the country. Clinton had a federal budget surplus. Yeah, he looted the retirement funds of the American people to create that. So we know that when push comes to shove, governments and bankers will literally go in and steal your money out of the trust funds, out of the accounts. There are even laws in place that are going to allow the government to go through safety deposit boxes looking for items of value in the event of an economic emergency, which is definitely on the horizon. And so our advice to our listeners and readers continues to be, you should have no more of your money in the bank than you need to cover your immediate obligations, your checks. You should have the rest at home under your own control. Don't even trust a safety deposit box at this point. And you should have any surplus cash that you have needs to be put into physical silver and physical gold. And again, go over to Republic Trading Group. They will treat you very well over there. Good prices on the physical. Or if you want, go out and start investing in what's called the junk silver, which are the pre-1965 U.S. coinage that are made out of silver, which are a recognized uniform medium of exchange. Meanwhile, down in Australia, we were talking about how they just had to put a new cash injection into their central bank, and now they've had to raise their debt ceiling. So now they're caught in the debt spiral, because they, too, have a central bank that issues all of the public currency as a loan at interest. And every nation in history enslaved to one of these banks eventually collapsed from the accumulated debt. I dare anybody out there to show me a nation that had a privately owned central bank issuing that public currency as a loan at interest that did not wind up destroying the lives of the people of that nation. Getting another story here. Apparently down off the coast of Nigeria, pirates have seized 2 Americans. And I got this weird email. It said, "Dear friend, forgive this intrusion by a complete stranger, but I saw your online profile and I know you are a kind person who can be trusted. I am the widow of a famous Nigerian pirate, and I need your assistance to transfer 2 Americans owned by my late husband to a place of safety in America. For this kindness, you will receive a portion of the ransom. But in order to facilitate the transfer, I must ask you to provide a good faith payment at your end for the sum of $5,000. I await your reply. P.S. Make that yuan, not dollars." Looks like Tom Hanks' new movie just got a ton of free publicity here. All righty, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Sam in Kansas. Aloha, Sam. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Michael. Aloha. I'm calling about something I just heard about, which was the joint U.S., Canadian, and Mexican, I guess they're called exercises, about the shutting off the power grid on November 13th and 14th.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that on Sunday, the 27th, the National Geographic Channel has got I guess it's a movie depicting what would happen if it went off for 10 days and the pandemic that it would ensue.
Mm-hmm.
And I know how the government likes to parade out before they do a false flag, like in the movies and in TV shows about something that's going to happen. I'm wondering if they're trying to pull something, because it would certainly be with Obamacare being such a debacle, and with
the problem with that, let me intrude here because we're almost at the commercial break. The problem with that is any kind of a disaster to the nation that is overtly a part of a government exercise will be blamed on the government. And for a false flag to work, they got to blame somebody else. Now, a little point of clarification. This exercise regarding shutting down the grid is shutting down the portion called the interconnect that ties all of the individual power stations together and keeps them synchronized and balances the load. They are not shutting off the electricity to your home. Your local power stations will still be operating. They'll just be operating in a standalone mode. So they're not deliberately blacking out the country. And if they black out the country as part of this exercise, the Canadians, the Americans, and the Mexicans are all going to point the finger of blame at the government itself, and that is a really lousy way to try and have some kind of a false flag to stimulate the war fever, to stimulate the economy, and so forth. On the other hand, looking at how badly they managed the Obamacare website, probably having some extra candles and flashlights during the drill is not going to be a bad idea.
Okay, outstanding. Thanks for your expert opinion.
All right, well, thank you very much here. A little statistic here. We've been talking about the right to keep and bear arms and how, setting aside the whole issue of government tyranny and the need for the people to stand up against it, common sense tells you that the Second Amendment grants to the American people the right to keep and bear arms equal to, if not superior to, those in the hands of the violent criminals. And now we are finding out the latest numbers. Violent crime in America increased by 15% last year, driven by economic hardship and the fact that the police are all off busy writing traffic tickets as a revenue-generating mechanism for their local community. So the criminals are just wide open. It's open season on the American people. You must be ready to protect yourself. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're getting an update on that quake off the east coast of Japan. There's been a 5.1 aftershock. There's been a lot of aftershocks, but it's rocking and rolling over there. There has been a tsunami warning issued for the east coast of Japan, including the area of the Fukushima nuclear power plant. How big the tsunami is going to be, well, this quake is basically 1/10 the size of the one that destroyed the station in the first place, but with that station already severely damaged and all these very fragile holding tanks and everything, it could get ugly, and we won't know until it's actually there. We're looking through the live webcam to see what happens there. There is no Pacific-wide tsunami alert at this time, including here in Hawaii. But it is a reminder that part of the world gets a lot of quakes. We've been getting a lot of quakes recently, by the way, I've kind of noticed here. Alrighty, I want to get on to the situation with Iran because Israel is in this full-court press to just somehow get the U.S. into a war with Iran. You must go kill the Iranians for us. They're evil. They hate us. Well, stop acting so hateful. Would Israel ever stop and think for a minute how much better life would be if they just tried to be more likable? That would solve a lot of problems here. Anyway, Netanyahu is pounding on John Kerry, saying we're warning him against the Iran deal, saying it would be a disaster for you to reduce sanctions and allow Iran to have a nuclear power station, even though Iran and the United States have both signed and ratified that treaty that says, yeah, Iran gets nuclear power stations. And, of course, AIPAC is up there in Congress, that grand old benevolent asylum for the aged and infirm, waving around their checkbooks and saying, remember, there's an election next year. You're not going to win it without our help. And so even a lot of Democrats who stood staunchly, firmly in lockstep with Obama on the Obamacare issue, they're now saying, oh, no, Israel is telling us we have to go make war on Iran. And it's amazing when it comes to Israel, Congress will turn on the president in a heartbeat. Remember when President Carter wrote his book, Peace Not Apartheid? And Nancy Pelosi rushed out to say that Carter is just speaking for himself as a citizen and he doesn't represent the feelings of the Democratic Party. We love our Israeli sponsors. We worship our Israeli sponsors. We bow down and daven to our Israeli sponsors in AIPAC 3 times a day. We have nothing to do with what Jimmy Carter said. So, now needless to say, we are once again getting the claim from Israeli sources that Iran is only 1 month away from having a nuclear bomb. They've only been saying that since 1985. And the implication that the instant Iran gets this nuclear bomb, that despite the fact they have not initiated a war of conquest against another nation in over 200 years, they're going to bomb Israel and the United States with it. They're coming to get you. Remember what I said about look for what should be there and isn't. And what should be there and isn't is a reason or a motive for Iran to drop a single nuclear weapon on either Israel or the United States of America, knowing that Israel is a nuclear power, the United States is a nuclear power, and the response would be immediate devastation of their entire country. Now, leaders of nations have monstrous egos. Look at our own as a good example. They go to bed at night dreaming of future generations of school children who will be gazing at their picture in the history books, admiring the statues raised to their memory, seeing their picture on the postage stamps in the currency of the nation. And all of that goes away if you make a mistake that destroys your own country. It doesn't make any sense. If Iran had a nuclear bomb, I'm sure they would keep it around as a deterrent to invasion, which is a real good idea with the U.S. and Israel attacking other. Every 6 months there's another incursion, drone strike bombing. Iran would put their nuclear weapon in a museum, or they'd march it down the street in a military parade and say, see how butch we are. They're not going to carry out an unprovoked nuclear strike against Israel or the United States of America because the result would be national suicide. They know it, you know it, the U.S. knows it, Israel knows it. This idea that Iran is a month away from a nuclear bomb is just more of the same as Saddam's nuclear weapons and Assad's sarin. These are just lies trying to revive the war agenda. Israel wants Iran removed as a regional power that threatens its influence over the whole area. The United States wants to invade Iran to force them to sell their oil only for U.S. dollars. Wall Street wants Iran invaded to get rid of their system of banking and impose an IMF, World Bank, Federal Reserve type model on that country. That's what's going on here. But they're really trying to ramp this thing up here because apparently over in Arizona, Representative Trent Franks has now introduced legislation into the U.S. Congress to authorize the President of the United States to use military force against Iran. Now, we saw the same thing where Congress authorized the use of military force against Iraq, all based on demonstrated lies. Senator Lindsey Graham is going to introduce a similar bill in the U.S. Senate. Yes, we must go smite Iran because Israel and the bankers have told us to. Now, let's go over to Representative Frank's own website. I want to read you a quote. Israel Congressman Trent Franks is chairman of the Israel Allies Caucus in the United States House of Representatives, the only official pro-Israel caucus in Congress. Trent believes the nation of Israel is the greatest friend and ally America has in the world. He's deeply committed to the security and success of the Jewish state. His vote has always and will always reflect that commitment. Trent understands that the alliance between America and Israel is not only good for Israel, it is also good for America. I would challenge him on that last one. This tiny nation, the only democracy in the Middle East, has been forced to defend itself against terrorists for decades. This is why Congressman Franks has worked so hard to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapons-capable nation and ensure the U.S. and Israel remain partners in developing and deploying a missile defense system that will defend Israel, the U.S., and our other allies against ballistic missile attack. So Frank is just bought and paid for by Israel. He proclaims loudly on his own website in his own district that his priority is a foreign nation. And I'm sure the people of Arizona, who are up to their armpits in illegal aliens streaming across that southern border, are probably thinking that they wish their elected representative were paying more attention to what's going on in his state. How many times do you have to be lied into a war before you realize you are lied into all wars? There is no evidence at all that Iran is building nuclear weapons. Iran historically does not start wars. And the day when politicians could just make up any pile of bovine excrement they wanted and count on the corporate media to regurgitate it to the American public and the American public to swallow it without question, those days are gone. And the sooner you realize that and start to evolve to deal with the new reality of information flow on planet Earth, the better off we're all going to be. Meanwhile, getting over the NSA spying, this continues to be a major, major diplomatic debacle around the globe. It's now come out the NSA has been spying on at least 35 world leaders, and probably all of them, let's be honest about it. Germany and Brazil are introducing a resolution at the United Nations to basically guarantee the privacy of Internet communication. To guarantee a right to privacy unless you are known to be engaging in a criminal endeavor. They're trying to basically take the Fourth Amendment from the United States Bill of Rights and make it a global policy. Unfortunately, the resolution is being introduced in the General Assembly, where it will probably pass to overwhelming vote, and the U.S. will promptly proceed to ignore it, because the NSA has already been ignoring the laws. They are not a law-abiding organization. They are a criminal organization. We'll be right back. Hello, hi America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 2 of our program. We're getting more updates from over in Japan. The workers at the Fukushima power station have been ordered to evacuate and move to higher ground. Apparently there is some concern that there is a noticeable tsunami on its way to the coast right now. We're going to be keeping an eyeball on that one. And, of course, a ton of seawater pouring over the remains of that reactor with all those open reactor cores. The consequences could be absolutely catastrophic, more so than they already have been here. Now, getting back to the NSA, kind of a weird, bizarre story that came out of the Daily Mail saying that it may have been Israel and not the U.S. that was hacking millions of French phones. Now, remember, the NSA is denying they had anything to do with it. It's a big diplomatic uproar. And I think the whole point of this story is to say, well, we don't really know who is doing this, therefore we cannot assign blame. Now, obviously, Israel and the United States are not mutually exclusive. Even if Israel is spying on the French, and they probably are, it doesn't mean the United States is not. They're trying to muddy the waters and say, we don't know who did it, therefore there's nobody that we can punish. And you need to remember, there is an existing agreement between the United States and Israel where Israel gets the raw take from the NSA. It's not filtered. They don't, take out stuff that might be embarrassing to American politicians. Israel gets it all. So Israel could very well be spying on French phone calls using the U.S. system. The whole point of this article is to get the fingers pointing in multiple directions, so the NSA has plausible deniability. Wasn't us, may have been Israel, may have been Great Britain, may have been Germany, we don't know. And again, that was part of the policy going back to the 1980s with the echelon system, where the U.S. and 4 other countries put together this mammoth system to spy on long-distance phone traffic over the satellites, and each country would spy on the citizens of the other countries and then just trade the information. The U.S. would spy on Australian phone traffic and give it to the Australians. The Australians would spy on American phone traffic and give it to the Americans, so that each government could say, we're not spying on our own citizens. It was just a way to evade the laws. These days, they don't even go through that theater. They just, we're going to do it. Nothing you can do about it. Now, the ACLU is wading into the fallout over LavaBit, because apparently the NSA went over to the founder of LavaBit, Ladar Levison, and said, you will give us all your encryption keys so that we can read all the traffic going through your supposedly secure mail server. And Ladar Levison, rather than capitulate to the NSA, simply shut his business down. At which point the courts hit him with a contempt of court charge, saying you are not allowed to shut down your business. You will run your business and you will give the NSA your encryption keys. So now the ACLU has waded in and saying that the whole point of LavaBit was undermined anyway and would have gone out of business as soon as the NSA spying was known, and therefore he's not really in contempt of court. He made a wise, prudent decision. But this is the stage where we have reached here in the United States, where the government is going to come in and say, you will run this business, you will give us the back doors, you'll give us the keys, you will do everything we say, and you're not allowed to quit your business. You will allow us to spy on your customers. You will stay in business. And I know a lot of people get upset when I do that kind of allegation, but even Gary Johnson over at Ex Republic TV is saying that the current NSA spying on the American people is very reminiscent of pre-World War II Germany, where they were spying on, or at least trying to look like they were spying on everybody to keep everybody quiet and going along with the Führer. And it's getting very overt out there. We have a story coming out of antiwar.com where Chief of the NSA, Alexander, is out there saying reporters must be stopped. And he's basically coming out there and saying we cannot allow even the corporate media, let alone the independent media, to report on what the NSA is doing. It's national security, and we have a right to do what we're doing. They don't have a right to do what they're doing. They're just doing it. The Constitution says they don't have a right to do that. And now we've reached a point where the government is saying, you know, we will order reporters not to report on bad things the government is doing. We were talking about Dianne Feinstein is trying to put a bill through Congress to make it a criminal offense, a federal crime for anyone in the country to criticize the NSA and what they're doing. And it's getting out of control. Over at dailycaller.com, they have this story about this veteran Washington, D.C. investigative journalist whose home was raided by the Department of Homeland Security, during which they took her confidential files in which her sources were named. Now, the warrant itself was only for firearms. They were conducting a firearms search of her home under U.S. law. The government did not have a legal authority to take her files and information. They just did it. Like the new Gestapo. We are in here because we think you have unsafe wiring, and while we're here, we're going to take all your hard drives. We have another story coming out of Washington State, and it involves this ongoing, very complicated battle going through the court system, where citizen activists who are attempting to bring lawsuits against the government are now being told that even if they get a lawyer to take the case for free, the lawyer's services have a fixed value that must comply with limits for donations to citizen advocacy groups. The limit in Washington State is $800. which a lawyer will go through in about 4 hours. And it's just an attempt to silence citizens groups and their public interest lawyers by saying, we don't care if you're working for free, we think your labor is worth this much money, and you're now in violation of the campaign donation limit laws. There is no morality left in U.S. jurisprudence. There's no ethics. It is simple expediency, silence dissent. Stop the complainers, shut them down, keep things quiet. Another article coming out of Rolling Stone pointing out that in addition to the official U.S. government spy agencies watching everything that you do, there are now private corporations that are acting as contractors for the government and for other corporations, conducting spy operations against protesters. And I imagine they're probably getting a lot of bucks right now from Monsanto to keep an eye on those people who are standing up and saying, we don't know that these GMO products are safe. We have a right to have labeling so we can choose for ourselves what we're going to eat. And, of course, the attitude of the government is, you will eat what we tell you to eat, and you will like it. And to show this encroaching dictatorship, I posted a flashback to a video from last April where MSNBC host Melissa Harris Perry was out there pushing the idea that America's children belong to the collective America. And the idea that kids belong to their parents or to their immediate families, that must go away, must be eliminated. Just because you bore that child and raised him doesn't mean you have any rights as a parent. The government knows far better than you how to raise that child. Of course, because we've seen what a wonderful job this government did with the Obamacare website, healthcare itself, the economy, Challenger, Columbia, Iraq, the hazards of GMO. Who wouldn't want that government deciding what's best for our children? I mean, really, how silly are you to reject this collectivist logic? And by the way, that was a major foundation of the former Soviet Union, that the government had jurisdiction over your children. And by the way, that's written into Obamacare, that the government can decide your child's medical treatment over the objection of the parent. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Jerry in Washington. Aloha, Jerry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Michael. How you doing, man? I'm a big fan. I think you're telling the truth, and I think people need to hear what you're saying. Mm-hmm. Because basically what we got going on is we got a political coup that probably happened years ago, but we're in the process of it right now. But what I would want to suggest is that what really happened, or maybe GCN or somebody, run a political candidate.
RBN.
Well, RBN. I know you guys are RBN, but I didn't want to say the name of the other, guy that preaches this. But anyway, the thing is, you guys probably together got maybe 50 million people that go to alternative media for their information. If you run, what's happening is the government is trying to make it illegal to have more than two parties because, both of them are the same one. So you get competition and they got a problem. But it's not yet in effect. So right now, if you guys got together and ran a political person like Jesse Ventura, or, another thing I want to say, good job on George Norrie the other night. I listened to everything you do, and you were awesome.
Thank you.
Anyway, run a political candidate, and take back the system that way, and make it.
Well, I hear what you are saying, but as you yourself pointed out, the laws are rigged to ensure the power of the two-party system. Now, this country, when it was started, did not have a two-party system. There were multiple parties that represented popular support for particular ideas and agendas. And what that meant is for corporate interests to bypass the will of the voters, they would have to give campaign donations to 5, 10, 20 different candidates. The two-party system is a cost-saving plan for large corporations because ahead of every election they only have to give campaign donations to 2 candidates. And the laws very much are rigged to favor those 2 parties, where your candidate that you declare at the National Convention is automatically in the ballot on all 50 states, whereas a third-party candidate must mount petition drives in every one of the 50 states to get on the ballot, which uses up vast amounts of volunteer time and other resources. So there's one way the system is biased. There's a story here where there's an election coming up, and I forget the state that it's in. They literally passed a bill in their state legislature saying no third parties are going to be allowed. And, of course, we all remember back in 2008 and 2012 when Ron Paul built a huge grassroots movement around his run for the White House, even as a Republican within the traditional party, and still got absolutely blockaded by interests that are serving the Federal Reserve and Israel. So I applaud Jesse Ventura for running in 2016. I'm running a humorous faux campaign in 2016 myself that I'm starting to crank up here, just as a platform to get some ideas out. But the reality is this system is totally rigged so that only the insiders are allowed to play, and long before any American walks into a voting booth, any candidates who might do something good for the people of this nation are already excluded. It's like George Carlin used to say, it's a big club and you are not in it.
Yeah, but the alternative is the Civil War. So I think maybe...
There's a third alternative. There's a third alternative, and it's the one I'm recommending. The system is going to crash the way the Soviet Union did. Just stay back. Don't give the government an excuse to declare martial law against the American people. Have some popcorn, drink a beer, and just watch the show when it all comes crashing down, because it is going to come crashing down.
Well, my point is we just need a way to raise awareness. A lot of people are sleeping, and they don't understand what's really going on. So if we can get in the political atmosphere and we could draw attention, like, say, for instance, the What Really Happened campaign. You know, people are going to go and they're going to listen like, who is this guy? So we're not trying to win. We're just trying to raise awareness.
Well, and we're succeeding. And we're succeeding. The latest polls are showing 2/3 of Americans do not trust the corporate media anymore. The numbers for trust of the government are even worse than that. And as I said before, when I did Coast to Coast this last week, and the next day we went in the supermarket, and we had a couple of the supermarket managers who heard my voice and said, wow, you were the guy who was on Coast to Coast. And what that tells us is ordinary Americans, not the independent media, not the people who are, normally considered to be in tune with what's going on with this government, but ordinary Americans have plugged in. They know something's gone wrong with this country. They're taking steps upon themselves to go and find out what it is. And I see that as a very positive sign. Our readership numbers are continuing to stay high and grow. Listenership at RBN is continuing to grow. You go over to the corporate media, they're losing audience like crazy. They're losing ad revenues like crazy.
Well, I understand that, Mike, but the thing is, I think what's going to happen is going to happen pretty soon. So I'm thinking, just personally, that we have to get more aggressive. I think a political candidate in 2016 will make everybody go to your website or whoever runs it, because we probably got millions of viewers. But if you go in the political stage, even like the problem with Ron Paul is they shut him down.
That's exactly right. They shut Ron Paul down. And I still have all the photos that we were taking during the 2012 campaign of Ron Paul's town hall meetings and campaign rallies, standing room only, and we were looking at Mitt Romney's campaign rallies, and we caught them using Photoshop to take 20 people and make it look like it was 200 or 300. There is absolutely no question that if we had an honest election system in this country, Ron Paul would have been in the White House this year, possibly back in 2009. But we have a complete... Okay, we're really past the point where we can work within this system, because the system is set up to make us think that we have an influence over the government, but in point of fact that we don't. And I agree with you that we need to avoid a civil war and a revolution, but my advice is de-link, unplug from the system, stand back, and just let it all come crashing down. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call, Jerry. We're going to let you go here and get back to some other stories. And speaking of 2016... and I'll be very amazed if we actually get there without significant change to this country. George Soros is now backing a super PAC dedicated to electing Hillary Clinton as president in 2016. So I guess it's very much real here right now that Hillary is running in 2016. I don't know who the Republicans are going to think about throwing against her. I heard a rumor John McCain may step back in. But I think certainly within the political establishment, if Hillary runs, they're going to throw it to her. So whoever the Republicans run is just going to get up there to have fun on the campaign, and that will be it. What a disaster that will be for this nation if she gets into the White House. All righty. Now, we have been talking about this ad campaign called Disappearing Palestine. And, of course, it is very angering to Israel and their supporters because these maps show unequivocally that far from Israel being wiped off the map, it is Israel that is wiping Palestine off the map. And they've been trying to find a way to counter this. Now, about a week ago, they launched a counter-ad campaign showing the loss of Jewish lands going back to biblical times, and all of it was based on easily disproven allegations. And so now they've taken it one step further, and the ads up in Toronto have been removed from the bus stations on the excuse that it might inspire violence against the Jewish people. Now, the Jewish people living in Toronto, Canada, have nothing to do with Israel's policies in Palestine. It's just another made-up excuse so that Israel makes sure you don't see what they don't want you to see. And they're really cranking that up here right now. Apparently, they're over at Amazon, screaming that Amazon has to take down any books not approved by Israel or face a boycott. First Amendment? We don't need no stinking First Amendment. We'll decide what you get to read. More about this when we come back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this sudden surge in Israel's minions to try and crush down any view of history that does not suit their particular political agenda. And there's this story that has come. I mean, they got the posters taken down in Toronto. Our servers under constant attack. And now there's a number of these pro-Israel groups, including the World Jewish Congress, are demanding that Amazon stop selling any books that question the official Orthodox tale of the Nazi Holocaust. And they're saying if Amazon refuses, they will organize a global boycott to drive them out of business. This is, of course, completely un-American. It's a complete violation of the founding principles of the First Amendment and freedom of speech. But Israel doesn't see the world the same way Americans do. And I want to read you a quote, a very telling quote. Quote, "Our race is the master race. We Jews are divine gods on this planet. We are as different from the inferior races as they are from insects. In fact, compared to our race, other races are beasts and animals, cattle at best. Other races are considered as human excrement. Our destiny is to rule over the inferior races. Our earthly kingdom will be ruled by our leader with a rod of iron. The masses will lick our feet and serve us as our slaves." End quote. That was Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin in a speech to the Knesset, quoted by Amnon Kapuliak in the book Begin and the Beasts, New Statesman, June 25th, 1982. Not a book, an article. And I have a whole list of these quotes coming out from Israel's leadership that absolutely betray a mindset of racial superiority, which is amazing when you consider that most of the Ashkenazi are not descended from the biblical Hebrews. They're descended from Central Asian Khazars. They're even using the same terms the Nazis did, the master race. And this attack on Amazon is morally no different from the Nazi book burning. By the way, we are apparently celebrating the 100th birthday of the Anti-Defamation League, the ADL. And the ADL was founded in the immediate aftermath of the conviction of Atlanta B'nai B'rith President Leo Frank for the strangulation and sex murder of a 13-year-old factory girl, Mary Fagan. Now, the Jewish community did not believe Frank should have been arrested or convicted. He's a nice boy. It doesn't matter what he does. And they had mounted a huge press, publicity, legal, and lobbying campaign to convince officials and the public that a black man, James Conley, was the real killer. But the evidence against Frank was overwhelming, and the evidence against Conley was thin. And this Southern, all-white, and doubtless philo-Semitic jury unanimously convicted Leo Frank and sentenced him to hang. The governor then commuted the sentence, which angered the citizens into breaking into the jail and just lynching the guy. 2 months after Frank's conviction, the ADL was formed. And the ADL exists to prevent defamation, meaning negative information appearing in public about their community, even if the community is actually guilty of the wrongdoing. Remember when Bernie made off with the loot, got sent to the Huskow for cheating his own investors and his own people out of $65 billion? Remember the headlines of the shock wasn't that he'd cheated all the people, it's that he'd cheated other Jewish people. And Madoff's wife was going out and saying, oh, it's all the fault of the Gentiles. No, it's Bernie's fault. Had more money than any one human could spend in a lifetime, and it was still not enough. He was a classic money junkie. He had to go out and get more. And the real crime here is the Securities and Exchange Commission, over a period of 12 years, looked the other way, even when people like Harry Markopoulos came in with evidence of a Ponzi scheme gift-wrapped on a silver platter. No, we can't investigate Madoff. We'll be charged with anti-Semitism. We can't go after them. Meanwhile, the drone situation is continuing to explode in the news. Pakistan has now officially said the drone attacks into their territory must stop. There are revelations that as much as 30% of the intended targets are actually innocent of any wrongdoing. And of course, there's the side issue of the some 40 to 50 innocent bystanders killed by these drone strikes. And there are the allegations of what's called the U.S. double tap, where they will send in a drone, hit the target, kill a bunch of innocents, then as the emergency responders show up, they do a second attack. These drone attacks are violations of international law. They're acts of war. Obama is using the drones the same exact way Adolf Hitler used his V-1 buzz bomb and his V-2 guided missile. They were well ahead of their time, but they weren't that accurate. They were lucky if they just got somewhere generally in the area of London. They were not targeting military targets. They were terror weapons, terror from the skies. And the goal of Adolf Hitler was to so terrorize the British people that they would turn on the British government and say, whatever Hitler wants, you give him. And that's what Obama is trying to do in all these countries where he's sending in these drones, is to get the people of those nations so terrified of drones in the skies that they will turn on their government and say, whatever the U.S. government wants, give it to them. It didn't work in Great Britain. And it's not working in these countries where the U.S. are sending these drones in. It is angering the populations of these nations against the United States, just as the V-1 and V-2 angered the British population against Germany. Now, I want to get on to some health and safety issues here. I mentioned this briefly yesterday. There's a new documentary out on HBO. And I'm a huge fan of HBO's documentaries. All by themselves, they are worth the price of subscribing to them on your cable service. And this documentary is called Life According to Sam Burns. And I caught a little bit of it earlier in the week, and I sent my DVR to grab it. And last night, my wife and I watched it all the way through. And it's a little difficult to watch at times. But it is a story of amazing courage and heroism and scientific investigation when it's done right. Now, the topic of the documentary is a medical condition called progeria, which it's very, very rare. There's no big money behind any of this stuff. But it's a very rare condition. Children who are born with this condition appear to age very rapidly, and they start succumbing to the illnesses normally associated with extreme old age. And the average lifespan of a child with progeria is about 13 years. So this documentary follows the story of a child who's got progeria. His name is Samson Burns, or Sam for short. And both of his parents are medical doctors. And when they realized that Sam had this condition, they refocused their entire life into looking into what caused progeria, because nobody really knew. And they set up a foundation, they got funding, they conducted research. It took 3 tries before they finally got their paper published, where they had identified a drug which is not a cure, it's a treatment. It can hold off the effects of progeria. It's not going to help the kids who've already suffered the physical harm, but for brand new babies who are diagnosed with this, it basically can prevent the harm from happening in the first place. Now, there was a piece of information that just leapt out from this documentary at me. They've identified the cause of progeria, and it is triggered by the alteration of a single base pair in the human genome. Now, there are 3 billion base pairs in the human DNA, 3 billion. And this alteration of this single, 1 out of 3 billion base pair, is the cause of progeria. And what it does is it malforms a protein, because how DNA controls your life is through a process called protein expression, where the DNA code is written, it is carried by messenger RNA, which then has the body synthesize the necessary proteins, and the proteins join the body by fitting into receptor sites. Now, this single erroneous base pair causes the creation of an altered protein which is accepted into the receptor for the normal protein, but it is toxic and it is harmful. And it deteriorates the support structure for the cell wall of the nucleus of the cell. And as that breaks down over time, you start seeing all these other degenerative issues starting to come in. Now, why this is important when we come back from these commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we're talking about this wonderful HBO documentary, Life According to Sam. And it's won a whole bunch of film festival awards. This is really very, very well done. It is a little hard to watch at times when you see what these children are going through. And on the other hand, to listen to Sam himself and the incredible courage of this young man who understands fully that his life, up until they found this treatment, that his life was going to be cut short. He's a star student. He's in the marching band. Wants to go to MIT. There's a profile in courage right there that is definitely worth looking at. So we're talking about how his parents, who were physicians, discovered the cause of progeria. And it came down to a single base pair in the human genome. 1 base pair out of 3 billion. And it caused the protein that was being manufactured by that segment of the DNA code to be faulty. And that protein was still being accepted into the receptor sites for the normal healthy protein, but proved to be toxic, and that is the cause of this whole illness. Now, why this is important and why it leapt out at me is because of this issue over whether or not in the long term GMO food is safe. Now, we know that with normal cooking, the altered DNA in GMO products is destroyed. And companies that are producing these products like Monsanto, that's their basic argument. Look, the DNA itself is destroyed when you cook it. There's nothing to worry about here. The problem is, while that organism is being grown prior to harvest, the altered DNA is creating malformed proteins with unknown potential for harm. And we already know these organisms are displaying unanticipated side effects. Monsanto's Roundup Ready corn, for example, after it was already out there and planted, they discovered the corn stalks were all of a sudden much tougher than the natural variety and were literally puncturing tractor tires. So farmers who planted Roundup Ready corn had to literally buy Kevlar tires for their tractors. And that tells us nobody's looking for unanticipated side effects. The idea is, here's the genome, we're going to alter this point to produce a change. But the reason DNA can carry so much information is it's incredibly self-referential. Everything in DNA is referencing everything else. It is an amazingly compact collection of the information to drive the chemistry of life. And Sam's case shows how a single wrong base pair out of 3 billion can trigger massive damage. And the current state of safety testing for GMO products is woefully inadequate to assess the potential risk to health and life from errors in protein expression caused by the altered DNA. Now, we know that French study into GMO corn and glyphosate showed that starting at month 4 in the life cycle of the rats, 1 month after Monsanto's own testing stopped, the rats started developing major medical problems. They had 4 groups of rats. They had rats that were fed all organic. They had healthy lives. They had rats that were fed on GMO corn that developed medical problems. They had rats that were simply exposed to the glyphosate that had major medical problems. And they had a group of rats with both the GMO corn and the glyphosate. And boy, did they have a miserable, miserable existence. This is the most dangerous technology that humans have ever played with. And it's being deployed and marketed with an insane degree of recklessness and disregard for long-term consequences. It's all about that next quarterly report. We got to have profits. We've got to get more money here. And it is very, very dangerous. Because in the case of Sam, and yes, it's an extreme case, it's the far end of the probability spectrum, but a single altered base pair out of 3 billion had devastating consequences on the lives of these children. Got to catch that documentary, you really do. Meanwhile, of course, around the rest of the world, the purveyors of GMO are getting hammered. Mexico has now halted the planting of any more GMO corn. They do not want it in their country. Ultimately, they're probably going to have to do the same thing that Hungary did and burn those fields to destroy the pollen, to keep it from getting anywhere. Over here in Hawaii, on the island of Kauai, they just passed a law that mandates all farms to disclose what pesticides and if they are using genetically modified crops. And if you are using genetically modified crops, you must have a huge buffer zone, and they mandated a 500-foot buffer zone near all medical facilities, schools, and homes, and other locations. Now, unfortunately, 500 feet isn't enough, but Hawaii is a very small place. Remember that scandal where the supposed natural variety of wheat being grown in Oregon was found contaminated with an unapproved GMO wheat gene that apparently blew halfway across the country to get there. Now, down on the Big Island, they've given preliminary approval to a bill that prohibits all GMO crops, except for GMO guavas, which are already entrenched there, and they're not going to get rid of those. But people are beginning to stand up against this. It is insanely dangerous. You know, in another context, we're always talking about, is there life out there in the universe? Of course there is. Way too big for us to be the only one out there. Why haven't they visited us? And, of course, one argument is, what do we have that's of interest? I know Stephen Hawking is out there saying we should be careful what we're broadcasting out there. We could invite invasion. And my answer is, what do we have that's worth invading for? We're talking about alien civilizations with faster-than-light travel and immense sources of energy and transmutation. What do we have that they would want? Tribal artworks? When you're driving down the highway in your brand new car, do you stop and examine every single anthill that you pass? Let's get realistic. But there's another possibility out there. What if every intelligent civilization hits a crisis point where their technology reaches the point where they can start tinkering with their own life code and they wind up making a mistake that it extincts them? And this gets back to the questions over that epicite corn. This was a corn that was genetically engineered so that people who eat it develop antibodies to human sperm. In other words, if you're eating this corn, you cannot have children. It was developed by the USDA, was then bought by some other companies, probably to have as a potential human population control. Oh, here, have some free corn down there in your country that's overcrowded. get rid of all those people living over those natural resources that really rightfully belong to the United States of America. But what happens if that gene breaks into the wild, as we have already seen so many times? And this corn sterilizes not just the targeted groups of people that somebody has decided should no longer reproduce, but what happens if it targets everybody? You're talking about a potential extinction level event. These people know GMO is harmful. If they truly, in their heart of hearts and in their laboratory reports, thought this was a good thing, there'd be no question about GMO labeling. It would be all over the box. Contains GMO! When you look at how hard they are fighting against GMO labeling, they know there is a problem. And these soulless corporate leaders are perfectly okay selling you a harmful product and will work to make sure you don't know you're eating it. When too much money gets collected together, it takes on a life of its own. Science fiction writers used to always talk about how computers would rule the world. They already do. They already do. I will elucidate when we come back from Phyllis Shapley and commercials. America, welcome back to the show here. And before I went to the break, I was talking about the idea of computers ruling the world. It's a constant theme in various science fiction stories and movies, including the recent Will Smith retelling of Isaac Asimov's I, Robot. And in these movies, especially in I, Robot, the idea is the computers have all this control, and through a misinterpretation of their priority to take care of us, they take over the whole world. Well, the situation is actually a little bit worse, because computers are running the financial system. And through that financial system, they influence our lives. And unlike Vicky in I, Robot, who at least had a misunderstood motive of taking care of the people, the computers that run the financial systems of planet Earth, and through those systems us, have only one programmed agenda: the acquisition of more wealth. And I think one of the big, deep, dark secrets of Wall Street that the CEOs don't want to admit is they've actually already lost control of the financial system. They've delegated too much of the decision-making to the computers, and they're reaping huge fortunes from all the high-frequency trading. Decisions about what to invest in or not are decided by computers, purely on the potential for an immediate profit, with no other considerations. And I think that's one of the reasons the system is cascading very much out of control. I think we're in a particular point of view, computers are already running the planet. And they're not doing it for the benefit of the planet's population. They're gambling for Quatloos. For all you Star Trek fans out there, there was an episode, The Gamesters of Triskelion, where the entire planet was just run as a giant gladiatorial combat arena for the disembodied brains to wager Quatloos on. And we're literally in the same situation, where this ink and paper, these computers are programmed to think that this ink and paper or the numbers in their memory represent something real and tangible that must be gathered unto themselves. And those people who serve that system grow wealthy, and those who refuse to go along are immediately ejected. So ultimately, you know, we can scream about the bankers, but it is a systemic problem that is amplified by the computerization. Our planet may already have its own intelligence residing in this vast networked computer system, and we have no more chance of actually communicating with it than our mitochondria have in communicating with us. But we should recognize that it's out there. Everyone's talking about artificial intelligence, but they're very chauvinistic. They're talking about artificial intelligence that mimics that of human beings. And it blinds them to the possibility of an artificial intelligence that has evolved that is so completely inhuman as to be completely invisible. That's something that's going to bake your noodle over the weekend here. Meanwhile, getting back to Al Gore and his global warming, As you're probably aware, he just did this 24-hour telethon trying to resell global warming. It's a crisis. It's dire. The doom is coming if you don't buy my carbon credits and pay the carbon taxes. And the show had almost no ratings. Nobody tuned in. And even other global warming activists and carbon Nazis were saying he went way overboard. His apocalyptic final days, end times tone almost sounded more like a tent preacher selling salvation rather than a real scientific discourse. Meanwhile, as it turns out, looking at the actual raw data, which is always a good idea, 5 of the 6 snowiest winters on record have occurred since David Viner declared the end of snow. Remember, 10 years ago, snow will be a thing of the past. And since then, we've had all these hard winters, which apparently include 5 of the 6 snowiest winters ever recorded. We ran a little poll on my website earlier today. Would you rather watch Al Gore talk about global warming for 24 hours or be waterboarded? Waterboarded won, 95%. And it's another cash grab. And with the cash grab from Obamacare clearly failing miserably, they're trying to resell global warming. We must have your carbon taxes. We must have your obedience. Meanwhile, we're seeing more power grabs coming out of the Environmental Protection Agency. They're trying to change the legal definition of water that falls under their jurisdiction, down to the point of having jurisdiction over accumulated water on your property, meaning puddles. Now, we've already seen in many states across the United States where the state has declared they own the rain that falls on your property. Those are the king's raindrops, you knave. And you can be fined for setting up a water barrel underneath the downspout from your rain gutter to collect rainwater. Or probably just leave the rain barrel out there in the open because what's coming down the gutter is full of all kinds of debris. But now the EPA wants to have jurisdiction to come onto your property, your home, and tell you whether or not you should let the puddle sit, whether or not you should collect rain. Even Adolf Hitler didn't go onto the German people's homes and say, you can't put out a rain barrel. It's just this incredible, incredible grab for more power and authority over every single aspect of your life. It's amazing. Our phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Let's get some phone calls in here before the end of the show here today. And as you probably noticed, the lovely Lady Claire did not join us in the third hour. She had some Claire things to do, and she had to go on out, and she will be back next week with her unique perspective on a lot of things here. A lot of people are very concerned now about this partnership between Facebook and police authority. And they're concerned because if you are using Facebook to organize a protest, the police are going to be notified about it immediately. Let's go down and protest the ugly green paint they just put on the library, and you get down there and the police are already waiting for you. Which shouldn't be a problem if you're doing a peaceful protest, but we have seen how the police will provoke violence in protest to justify coming in with a crackdown. And it's just, we really are in a police state right now. We're going to take a phone call here, John and actually, John, we're coming up on a commercial break, and I don't want to cut you off. So we're going to go to commercial, and when we come back, we're going to take John in Barbados and the other phone calls that are coming in here. We're still trying to find some additional information coming out of Japan as a result of that quake that hit this morning. We know that the area of the destroyed Fukushima nuclear power station has been evacuated, and the workers all told to seek high ground. Still haven't seen whether anything has actually happened yet or not. Guessing tsunamis is kind of a little bit hard, but again, we are not under a tsunami watch here in Hawaii. Gerald Salende is out there. He's basically saying the global economic meltdown is going to happen next year. I I have to agree, it may not even make next year. I'm surprised they've held it together this long, but then we keep forgetting the other side likes to cheat. And they're lying about so many of the economic indicators, whether it's the unemployment numbers, the scale of the U.S. government debt. They're still out there waving around that $17 trillion figure. That's only the official debt. We know that with all the other unfunded mandates and obligations, it's over $200 trillion. We know the derivatives exposure exceeds the value of the entire planet. This Ponzi scheme has gone as far as they can possibly drive it. We're going to take a break for some commercials here. We'll be back with John in Barbados after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go to the phones here right now. John in Barbados. John, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Aloha, Michael. This is your not-so-local friendly Caribbean critic here. I want to comment on the EPA and this water system and what they're doing with America's water. Perhaps people should consider suing the EPA when they get flooded and property damage for the flooding, for their failure to manage the water properly. What they own. I mean, they claim to own this water, and it's their water that's done damage to your property.
Oh, no, it's force majeure. It was an act of the imaginary playmate in the sky, and you can't sue the government no matter what they do wrong because they meant well. I mean, there literally are, in the United States of America, there are federal laws that say you cannot sue the government for wrongdoing, even when it's just obvious, egregious violations. I mean, they're trying to use these laws to shield some of this police brutality. And we just see, as a matter of practicality, it is very, very rare for a police officer to lose his job or get charged. They did do it in the case of this police officer who just gunned down this mentally ill man. He's been fired. But suing the government is extraordinarily difficult. The courts have zero tolerance for it. And in a lot of cases, it's a fear reaction because people are going in there with the letter of the law against a government that has clearly violated that law. And the job of the courts is to somehow make it look all okay and get the American people to sort of go along with the agenda a little bit longer. The courts are not there as impartial umpires in the debate between government and the people. They are costumed theater people to stand up and tell you, do what the government tells you, and you should because actually this is the way it's supposed to be. It's like a new priesthood. That's why they wear robes. It's another form of religion to say, believe this is the way the world is supposed to be.
Well, I mean, I thought these agencies were actually just agencies, not part of government. They were private agencies funded by the government to do a particular job.
I don't know what the ramifications would be of trying to sue them, but, you know, sometimes it works. Usually it does not. Because the government does love to protect its own.
Yeah. Well, it just was an idea because, I mean, they claim to know how to handle this water. You can't put it in barrels. You can't manage it yourself. They are supposed to manage it. And when they fail and you suffer property damage, it's certainly natural that you should want to sue them.
And I agree with you. And we look at people down, for example, in New Orleans following Hurricane Katrina, or in the aftermath of Hurricane Sandy, where a great deal of the damage was magnified because government had stopped maintenance on the levees. They had stopped cutting the dead branches on the trees away from the power lines. They had not kept the storm drains open, but the lawsuits went nowhere. Look at all these private corporation telecommunication companies like AT&T who were part and parcel to this violation of the Fourth Amendment right to privacy of the American people. They've been indemnified. You can't sue them for what they were doing.
I understand the pharmaceuticals also enjoy a degree of indemnity against prosecution and lawsuit.
Yeah, they do.
They make a mistake.
Yeah, it gets covered up. I mean, there's civil litigation, but the reason they put out all their commercials with these warnings about the problems is anybody who takes the drug and something bad happens, they'll say, look, we told you in the commercial this could happen. You've got no right to sue. You were fully informed. The Homeland Security Act that created the Department of Homeland Security included a rider granting immunity to vaccine manufacturers on the theory that because there might be a biological terror attack, the vaccine makers had to have the means to fast-track vaccines out there without fear of being sued for any mistakes they might make. But, of course, the indemnification was not just on vaccines in response to a biological terrorist attack. It was against all vaccines, including those with thimerosal, which is certainly, there's a huge amount of evidence linking that to the autism problem in this country. And they were given a blanket immunity.
What I also understand now is that people who criticize the critters in the White House can now face arrest and being charged with contempt, which seems a bit silly.
I would question that one. I know they're being fired. They just fired somebody from the White House for tweeting some negative comments about White House personnel, and apparently the White House itself was like following his tweets without realizing who the guy was. But I don't know that contempt would be the appropriate word, because when you're talking about the White House, you're not in a court proceeding, and the White House is not part of the judicial branch. They may be putting it under something like it's sedition. We're hearing a lot of that come about here, some of these politicians here. But again, going back to that First Amendment, we, the people of the United States, have a right beyond question and control and abridgment to stand up and say the government is screwing things up, and we don't agree, and we don't approve, and we're not going to pay for it any longer, and no, you may not have my son or daughter to go off on another war of conquest to prop up Bretton Woods.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's other things that, I mean, I don't quite agree with you on. America seems to be supporting largely this police state fascism, because all the people in the various organizations, the TSA, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, the Homeland Security, even the state police, the state troopers, the highway patrol, they all are Americans, and they seem to be bringing this forward by simply working for the government. And I think it's 35 to 40% now of all those who are actually in work are working for the government in some form or other.
Well, again, that's part of the plan. The government wants every American dependent on them, either for a job or for food stamps or some other kind of assistance, because that way that will keep us silent. They don't want people who are out there independent, making their own way through the world, because people like that will stand up and say, you know, bull biscuits. You know, it's some of the stuff that's going on here. All right, well, listen, John, going to let you go here. I got a couple of stories I want to get to before the commercial break. We got more phone callers waiting that we're going to take in the next segment here. Apparently, the tsunami that did reach Japan from this morning's earthquake was only 1 foot high. Good news. So it did not inundate and damage the Fukushima power plant any more than it already is, so that crisis is over. Apparently, consumer groups have now gone public saying that for those few Americans who actually got all the way through the Obamacare website and signed up for an insurance plan are all of a sudden discovering the actual price of the insurance they bought is considerably higher than what the website told them it would be. Now, we posted a link to the actual healthcare.gov database about insurance prices. It turns out those prices are not accurate. So this thing is just an absolute disaster. It's going to backflash on the Democrats big time in the next election. They're still out there trying to say, oh, it's the Republicans' fault here. And I remember when Waxman was out there during the hearings into the website saying, well, yes, the Republicans were saying things were going to be bad, but they said it was going to be a lot worse, so obviously they were wrong. It's not as bad as they said, therefore this is all their problem. But I think most Americans are dealing with this situation, are going to realize that regardless of the motivations of the GOP for trying to delay or shut down Obamacare, the GOP was trying to do the right thing for the American people. And they are going to remember that next year. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with a bunch of phone calls after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones. John in New York. John, aloha. Thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. How you doing?
Doing good.
I was just wondering if you can help me out with this subject. I ran across a movement, maybe you've heard of before, called the LaRouche Pact. Lyndon LaRouche.
Yeah, I'm familiar with Lyndon LaRouche, and he's got his pack, but he's got a bunch of different movements. Which one are we talking about?
I guess it's the one to remove Obama. Is this guy for real, or is he?
Well, he's been around for a very, very long time, and some of what he says makes sense, like reinstating Glass-Steagall. Sometimes he tends to go off the reservation a little bit, and as a result, the corporate media has tended to marginalize him a little bit. My personal opinion of Lyndon, not to be taken as gospel, is that he's one of these people who is trying to find a great overview controlling body on which to blame things, and of course my theory is what's going wrong in our country is happening right down on Main Street, right in front of the American people. So I know I was contacted by Lyndon's people about wanting to get him involved in my website, and I had to give him a polite thank you no.
Oh, okay. I just never heard of him before. And
he's been around a long time. He's been around a long, long time.
I'm not sure how I missed him, but I guess I did.
All righty.
That was my big question to you, and the one thing I just wanted to say is I almost hate being awake. I hate it. I can't even watch TV the same anymore. I don't even listen to music the same as I used to. So, but that's the thing of being awake now, knowing what's going on around you.
Yeah, well, nobody ever said it was going to be pleasant. It always reminds me of that line from the movie The Matrix, which is a wonderful metaphor for what's been going on, where after Neo takes the red pill and Morpheus says, all I'm showing you is the truth. Don't get your hopes up too high. And, that's, it's an ugly reality. And, a lot of people prefer the pleasant fiction that government loves us and the bankers are honest and so forth. But the reality, it's a very, very ugly reality. But on the other hand, it does feel like we're on the verge of this incredible transformation of civilization, pulling back and saying money is okay, but money should not be our master. Government is supposed to be the servant of the people, not the other way around. And certainly this revolution, this dramatic change in the way information flows through society is what is bringing about this transformation right now. John, we're going to let you go. We're going to switch over to Dylan in Seattle. Dylan, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. Actually, in Seattle, we have lots of IT industry over here, and significant. And one of the industries, famous one, is Amazon.com.
Mm-hmm.
Stock is soared today to the heights.
Excellent.
And it sounds excellent, but the workers there's huge controversy with Amazon has done, and the protesters, a lot of the employees are protesting their poor working conditions and the way they're treated. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people who work for Amazon have gotten made off money off stock options, but are making low wages, and they don't even have proper air conditioning in the summertime. There's a lot of horrendous conditions, and there's a lot of lawsuits going on. And but Amazon basically they don't pay sales. The states are trying to force Amazon to pay sales tax on the in transactions, even if they don't have a presence in the state. It was technically unconstitutional, but they're trying to do it. Like for example, if you buy something if you're in Seattle, you buy something from a warehouse in California, you have to pay that's Seattle's Washington State sales tax. Mm-hmm. So that's the problem. So it's right on going after Amazon, but overall the other retailers like JCPenney and the Sears group, which owns Kmart, is like going away, and Radio Shack's going away. So there's a whole bunch of that's like basically this model, this Walmart model is taking over. It's like monopolistic model, just bringing.
Part of the problem here, there's a couple of overlapping issues. During the early history of the United States, we saw hideous abuses by companies against their employees. Got a lot of folk music out of it, Ballad of John Henry, for example. When the Russian Revolution happened, it was a wake-up call to American businessmen that, yes, they had to be as concerned with their workers' happiness as with their stockholders, and things got a lot better. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the removal of what everybody thought might be a socialist revolution in this country, corporate abuse began to crank back up again, operating the whole country as if it's a giant company town. A lot of this is also driven by the inherent problem with our monetary system, because it is always generating more debt than money with which to pay that debt. Corporate leadership, in order to service their debt, in order to pay taxes so the government can service their out-of-control debt, they have to cut somewhere, and they don't want to make their stockholders unhappy because the stockholders can vote them out of the boardroom. So inevitably, it does fall on the workers. And again, I'm not a big fan of unions. Unions were the bane of my entire career in Hollywood, but they do serve a function to try and balance necessity between worker interests and corporate owners' interests. Normally, in a healthy economy, that's what the government is supposed to be doing. The arbitrator between corporate greed and what's good for the people. In our case, we've gone completely fascist, where the government is now totally aligned with financial interests against the people. So there's a lot of overlapping reasons why we're in the situation that we're in. Yeah.
Apple Computer cannot even repatriate their money back in the United States if they won't pay taxes. The reason why Apple Computer is overall like almost $200 billion in cash, tax-free, because they put it abroad. That's why they made it abroad. They don't want to bring it into the country because they want the IRS.
Okay, well, who set that up? Who set that up? The federal government wrote those tax laws. The reason the tax code is so many zigableams of pages long is that it's accumulation of special favors given to corporations, by politicians who were supported by those corporations. It's a huge, huge mess there. And this government has given corporations tax incentives that encourage the offshoring of high-paying jobs and the burying of production and production profits in other countries. If you want that to change, it's not Apple's fault. Apple is a corporation that is going to do what is in Apple's best interest.
These corporations are just parasite machines that suck everything.
The fault lies with the central federal government, which crafted a tax code that encourages this behavior. This behavior would stop immediately if there were stiff tariffs on the exporting of jobs and wealth to other countries, but this government won't do it because it is firmly aligned with corporate interests in this country.
Corporations are not responsible. I've dealt with actual business people, big business people, and they said, well, it's not my responsibility to worry about the environment, worry about the public, just worry about the bottom line, making as much money as possible. Even if it doesn't affect their profit, their bottom line, they're not concerned. The more focus on making as much money as they can.
Dylan?
Yes.
Okay, they're absolutely right. It is actually a law that a corporation's first responsibility is to their shareholders, and that legally takes priority. That's why we're supposed to have a government that comes in and says, we want you to make money, but you've got to treat your workers right, you've got to have safety standards, and you can't mess with the environment. Unfortunately, this government has failed that job completely. They've sold out to those corporate interests. The corporations are behaving like corporations. We expect that kind of behavior and attitude for them. We rely on, or we were told to rely on, the federal government to act as a mitigating force, and they failed. And
what happens to these obsolete electronics end up in Africa. They dump them there, just burn them, recycle them. They don't even recycle, they just burn them in huge pits, and they get the metals out.
Yeah, it's a major problem. It's a major.
The corporation no responsibility, dump everything around, then the taxpayer has to pick up the tab for cleaning things up. I mean, the story always repeats itself over and over again. The corporation, same thing. General Electric is just a scam. It had this financial division that was total fraud. Jack Welch was a fraud. He built this company out it was just a house of cards, and they really went out of business, and the government bailed it out.
Look, Dylan, calm down. You're drinking way too much coffee to be on my show. Okay. Again, the corporations are behaving the way we expect corporations to do. What we also expected was a governmental, civil government structure that is supposed to hold those corporate behaviors in check, just like they hold convenience store robbers in check, muggers in check, rapists in check. That's what the government is supposed to be doing. So if the corporate abuse and crime are going completely out of control, it's a failure of the government. Okay?
Yeah, actually, these corporations are not even really profitable entities. The government injects money to make in the open and hidden. They inject money. These companies they don't pay taxes.
Okay,
and the government
Dylan.
Yes.
Okay, you're not listening to me. We're off on a commercial break anyway, so I'm going to let you go here.
Great day.
Take some deep breaths and calm down. And again, corporations act the way corporations are set up to act. The controlling force to keep them serving the nation, the people in the community, is supposed to come from above, and it isn't. The failure is that of the federal government, not the corporations. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Going to grab a couple more phone calls here. Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Mike. Well, to go back to what the last caller was saying about corporations, you have to realize that corporations, by nature, in a perfect world, they would have a production cost that cost them nothing and a product or service that they could charge whatever they wanted for. The whole idea is to get costs down and profit up. And they're going to do whatever they feel they can get away with to reach that goal. So you're absolutely right. It is the responsibility of the government to keep corporations in check and to make sure that they are serving in the public interest. And as I'm sure you know, at the start of our country, in order to get a charter for a corporation, you had to demonstrate that your corporation was serving the public interest.
And the corporations had a time limit. You know,
and they would expire.
In ancient times, there was a ritual called stripping the dead. And what it was a way of preventing the accumulation of too much wealth in one place in society, because it was seen as inevitably destabilizing, because wealth will serve wealth and nothing else. When the idea of the corporation became law in the United States, even Abraham Lincoln said, this is a problem, because if you have a business that is chartered, that's centered on a businessman, that businessman has a lifespan. And when he dies, the business goes away and the wealth is divided and things flow along. Corporations, for all intents and purposes, are immortal entities that can live and aggregate wealth forever. And, will, as you say, their nature, their purpose is to use that wealth to draw more wealth to themselves, and it leads to a tremendous destabilization of society unless there's a correcting influence, which is supposed to be the government. But when the
John Perkins, the economic hitman, discusses and describes corporations as if they were clouds, and they're massive bodies that are floating above country lines, above government, and they're just able to go here and go there and interact and do what they will. And you're right, it's not a person, it's not a what have you. It's almost a religious thing. It's a belief. It's an idea. It's something that, if not kept in check, will continue to hurt. And the incestuous nature that we have today between government and corporation it's unconscionable. The fact that most of our leaders, when they're done in their public service, they go work for a private company. It's almost as if, being a senator or being a congressman or being president is your interview. It's your resume to get to have a level.
Absolutely. We've got former presidents who, after their terms in office, they run off and they join these large investment structures. And it really is. And remember what Mussolini said, all fascism is when government power merges with corporate financial power against the general population, which is exactly where we are here in the United States. We're not a capitalist society anymore. We're not even socialistic. We are flat-out fascist economic dictatorship.
Well, and that brings me to the reason why I actually called was the biggest problem we have today is the size of government and the size of corporations, and the fact that when you try to make a law that is going to apply to somebody in New York City or somebody in, the prairie plains of Montana or North Dakota, their lives are so completely different. There's almost nothing that they have in common, so that when you make laws that try to bind them to the same rules, it's almost doomed to fail. And we need to understand
that's another reason why the Founding Fathers put most of the authority at the state government, because the early states, the population was just clustered in a few centers and then spread over the rural area, and they knew the lives they wanted to live. And that was why it was set up that way. Then we have this federal government that has all of a sudden arrogated to itself the right to decide for other people, even thousands of miles away, like here in Hawaii. This is how you will live your life. And for people in the local communities who are feeling that government is completely out of touch, that is offensive. The early Black Panthers, before they were demonized and militarized, by the FBI's dirty tricks. Their original agenda was breakfast for the ghetto children and local control of the school curriculum, which is again an issue versus Common Core, where the government is trying to mandate a standard educational platform for the entire nation, forgetting that we're not a homogenized nation. We have industrial areas where the kids need to be taught industrial skills. We have rural areas where the kids need to be taught farming skills. This is not a one-size-fits-all educational system. We have our technology incubator areas where the kids need to be focusing on science, math, and engineering and computers. And this Common Core is actually, along with just transforming education into indoctrination, it is harming our ability to compete globally because we have to be specialized. We have to have people who focused and specialized on certain areas of skill set and not be worried about having to take Sanskrit 101 to meet the general education requirement.
Well, and I contend that you, me, wherever you live in this country, in a perfect world, you would be much more concerned about what your local mayor and what your local school board or local, elected members in your local county or community were doing, much more than you would be focused on what the President of the United States is doing.
Well, the reason for that is most Americans understand that their local community council, their mayor, even their state governor really aren't calling the shots anymore, that it really is all coming out of Imperial D.C. Kyle, got to let you go. We've got time enough for one more phone call before the end of the show. Ralph in California, thank you for waiting. What's on your mind? Ralph in California, are you there? I guess we talked Ralph to death. All right, well, no more phone calls then. We're basically at the point of wrapping up the show. So we are ending this week and heading into another week. Apparently the government has announced they're going to grant a 6-week extension on paying your Obamacare fines for not being signed up with Obamacare compliant insurance by the end of the year. A whole 6 weeks. They're never going to get that website working. Anybody who's worked in large-scale software development knows that when you add manpower to a late software project, you only make it later. There's another dimension emerging from this, and that is that apparently during the 2012 campaign season, the Obama White House was so focused on the political campaign and faking that they got bin Laden and all this other stuff they were doing, that oversight and direction of the website development simply collapsed, and you had these dozens and dozens of independent contractors trying to work on the code who were getting nothing in terms of direction or standardization from above. And anytime you're in a large project, whether it's software development or engineering a new car or an airplane, there has to be a top-down structure where decisions that affect the system as a whole are being directed from above and enforced as standards on everybody. And when you just have all these independent programmers running around, it's like herding cats. This is an absolute, complete failure of management, and the management is the Obama administration. This was their pet project, their flagship project. They got all their press out of it, and then they dropped the ball. They completely dropped the ball managing what was supposed to be their showcase because they weren't really thinking about the health of the American people. It's a cash grab. This government is so desperate for money. They are going to try and say and do anything to get more money from you. Obamacare, human-caused global warming, aliens are coming to invade us. There's a new disease out there that you've got to buy vaccines for. They're going to try all the same old tricks all over again. Iran is coming to attack us. We have to raise your taxes to build a new nuclear bomb shield because the old one doesn't work. That's the state that we're in right now. So, head into the weekend, and again, there is a question every single American should be asking right now when you talk about the debt ceiling. The Constitution authorizes the government to create and issue a debt-free currency. Why is this government borrowing that currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? That is the question all America must be asking. It is the question the government and the corporate media hope you will never think of. So share that with your friends. Please go over to republicbroadcasting.org. Hit that donate button. Buy your silver and gold from Republic Trading Group. We'll be back here on Monday. Have a good weekend, and aloha, America.